Hello everyone. We're doing our video tour of our project. It's more of a discussion than a tour, simply because our actual project is more of a grant proposal and it's a little bit more written than anything else. So our overall idea is to create a living resource for education to connect with, educators to connect with and collaborate with, and to learn from adult learners with disabilities around their experience with online education and what accessibility means to them. Working together in order to identify systematic ableism within our online educational materials and the modifications needed to provide all learners with the opportunity to succeed. In the vein of universal design, it is important to recognize and mitigate systemic ableism to allow equity for all learners. It is important to have a resource that is living and enduring in order to inform practice for educators about adult learners with disabilities, and to highlight educators that every learning is different, with different needs and different solutions to their learning needs, even within the same groups of disability.
So in creating this, what we're sort of envisioning as our big, full, long-term creation here is a vlogcast series in which we're talking with adult learners with disabilities, and they're sharing their thoughts around accessibility issues with online education, solutions that they've found to those accessibility issues, and their hopes and desires for the future of online education. With those, we're then going to take them and build case studies out of them that we're going to share on a blog to make that content available in a different manner and to reach different audiences. And then from those thoughts and what we learned from our different adults, learners with disabilities, we're going to be creating a series of open educational courses for educators, helping them to build accessibility for all by universal design into their online educational materials. And we're going to start with this with a course on ableism. And then sort of in parallel to that, we're also going to create an open educational course for learners, adult learners with disabilities, on advocating for themselves and their needs in online learning environments and working with educators to meet those needs.
So what's turned out while we worked on our project is our vision is turning out to be much larger than what's possible in the confines of this course, and it's something that we really want to do and keep up. So as a result, a lot of this is going to be an overview of our grant proposal framework. So we plan to keep this going and applying for grants to create what we're outlining here. So one of the things we'll be showing you is our grant proposal, just sort of a template with all the information that can be adjusted for where we're sending the grant proposal to. So it'll have proposal, the cover letters sort of for foundation, whether you're going foundational or academic, a research ethics board approval for the fact that we're actually having people come and participate, and a consent form and kind of protections for the people participating, and some of our project materials like the interview questions that we plan to use once we get this going, and a sample of the course OER. So our format, when we looked at it and kept changing it over time, is it's sort of a two-stream OER. One stream is for, well, we called it the tab stream, but it's for educators. When we talk about educators, we're talking about course designers, all kinds of educators. And the other tab, or the other stream, is for learners with disabilities. So they'll both start separately, with the educators learning about being a tab, about ableism and accessibility in the online classroom, and having discussions around that. One of the things, and this was a question, is if we're having the two streams on the learners with disabilities side, do we also present info on tabs and ableism to the learners that are joining us?
I know we've had this discussion, but yeah. For me, a part of me says yes to put a definition, and another part of me says no, because it's a bit like telling people what they are, what their disability is, or, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's a little bit difficult, but in thinking about my own process, I identify as a disabled person. I'm in a wheelchair part-time. Do I need someone to tell me what to do because I'm in a wheelchair? No. But in terms of someone with potentially a developmental disability, like a delay of some sort, or an intellectual disability that's difficult for them to understand what we're actually trying to give them, then the context might be okay.
As somebody with disabilities, before I started the class, I just applied to there's a grant, a Canadian student grant for students with permanent disabilities, and I qualify. But in BC, that's administered by Student Aid BC, which brings a whole slew of issues with it, because Student Aid BC doesn't allow students who are in a part-time studies program to apply to that grant, even though I can access that grant as a part-time studies student. But there's this block in BC. And it's a very ableist block because I needed a part-time studies program in order to work kind of within my energy envelope and everything like that, and make my master's successful for me. So I think if I'd started to write the letter I've been on a little bit of a letter writing campaign to a variety of ministry officials on why this is wrong and everything like that. And I think if I started to write that before I had a lot of the terminology from this course, I don't think those letters would be as articulate and as to the point about areas of inequities that they're creating and how things are not accessible the way they're saying matters to them. I wouldn't have known how to use the term ableism properly. And that's not because I don't have the mental wherewithal to share that. It's just I didn't know the terminology because I haven't spent a ton of time researching sort of or reading up on terminologies in those communities, even though I've been a part of those communities and technically have had disabilities my entire life. So I kind of think I think we can present that without talking down to people, and I think we can also present it in a way in which we're coming across okay, as learners with disabilities who are sharing from our experience, and so not telling somebody how to advocate, like necessarily telling somebody how to do it, but okay, these are what some of these terms mean, and it is possible to advocate for yourself. You don't need to take things just as I got a letter back yesterday, basically telling me that I just accept the way things are, and even though they're giving me all this talk about being accessible, they're essentially telling me that they're not accessible to me. And so, actually questioning and bringing that up yourself. And I think back to on Dr. Yantz's her story about working with To Train the Dragon, and at that stage of her academic career, not knowing that it's possible to advocate for herself and to say no. And I mean, I think she was advocating for herself in her story, but still not, learning to speak up more for yourself. And I personally think that, that's something I've been learning about my entire life, whether to do with my disability or other things.
Yeah, so I think this is where we, Eva, this is where we open it up to everybody else, right? This is where we say, hey, class, can you give us some feedback? Can you tell us what you think? We've all been reading all of this stuff. We've all been having these discussions. Dr. Yantz, Dr. Stack, fill us in. Are we headed in the right direction with this whole thing? Are we not headed in the right direction? Are we missing something? Is there more we should be talking about? So if, give us some feedback, please.
Yeah, because you don't want to be telling them what they're experiencing, but also there's the words. What do you guys think of one of the solutions, as Erica was talking, was, since we're running the 2 streams, if for the learners with disabilities streams, we said, this is what we've shown the educators about ableism, this is what we've shown the educators about being a tab. Have we missed anything? Is there something we should include and let them know before all of you guys get together? Because the idea is for them to both go through their streams and then meet up and share stories and be in a forum where everybody gets to talk.
Yeah, I think that's probably fairly key to having everybody working from the same set of information.
Lori, you've got a great point. I think this is where we really need the peer feedback and everything this week.
Yeah, I think that's part of our moving forward to making sure that our grant application actually comes into a project that's going to meet its intentions.
Yeah, and not what was the word I was reading today? Regenerate that whole ableist.
Yeah, and so in the same idea of not regenerating ableism, we also don't want to essentialize in our, in what we put out. So it's very difficult not to essentialize when you're doing something, because in order to address that, you have to think about your audience. And so we can't be everything for everyone. It's impossible to make this truly a resource that is for everyone, because to get the depth out of a person's story or individual's relationship, but also the breadth of what's out there, it's impossible to do, I think, in one. There's no silver bullet is what I'm getting at. So I think we have to keep that in mind and remember that this could be a place of considerable collaboration between educators and learners with disabilities, and it's going to depend on engagement. And engagement is going to be a comfort level with their story, with the learner's story, with what they're wanting to share, what they're able to share, and what parameters the REB puts on us for what kinds of questions we can ask and what kinds of information we can publish about individual learners. And so we are going to be in a position where essentializing could happen. And so what do we do?
But I like that you brought up the REB, because that was one of the other concerns, because I was working on the research ethics board, and there's a lot about, not that this is a research study, but some academic institutions will want some of that filled out and get approved because you're inviting people in to share their stories. There's a lot about how to put protections in, and how do you protect identity, and how do you protect their mental state, and how do you not harm people. But I get stuck as I'm pulling that one in, and this is another question to you guys in the class, is where do you go from the research ethics and protecting people and participants to, if we put too much in, like here's how you advocate, here's how you protect yourself, are we actually treating them like children? Or I was looking up the word infantilizing them, which would be the same thing all over again.
Well, and I, sort of as a documentary storyteller, the one thought that goes through my mind there is when you take people's voices and minus and their faces away because we're being uber safe about protecting everybody, you actually have a lot of people who do want to share their stories, and they want a platform to share their stories. And when we hear from the individual, it carries a lot more power than if we're sort of just reading words with no connection to an individual. And we're talking about adults here. We're talking about individuals, and should they not have a say in the decision for themselves as to how much and how we tell their story and how we share that story of theirs. And so I know one of the things I do with my documentary projects is often after I've edited a little piece, I will send it to the person before I go to publish it, and I will say, are you okay with all this? Is there anything you'd like taken out? do you want a greater degree of anonymity? Those kind of questions, and then leave it to them to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, that's a great point to add to the research ethics. What I'm thinking about, and this is just while we're talking, we might have to cut this part out because I may freak out about this part. What about if somebody who's new to their disability or just coming to terms with it, that wants to talk about it, but then, I don't know, feels vulnerable or exposed or something. And you know what I'm thinking about, because I've shared with these guys that I have a strong history of Alzheimer's. That might be true.
Yeah, and I mean, that's something that, I've only actually, my more recent disabilities from the car accidents, I've only really started to talk about more publicly in the last year. Before that, my creative partner in storytelling had wanted me to, but I wasn't ready. I needed to handle on managing my disability and sort of, because it's almost a new, it's a new chapter in my life. I needed to do a bit of grieving over my previous chapter first. And so there have been times when I've been asked to give interviews and stuff like that where I've said, I don't think I'm ready to do this quite yet. And that was okay. And I know that I've been invited back to talk when I am comfortable. It was also offered to me that I could have those layers of anonymity to sharing my story if I wish them. And I don't know. I personally, I like that idea of having choices and options in there.
Yeah.
Shared.
I think that's a really a big piece of it, is giving the personal power to the person that's giving you the story and the connection to what online learning has been for them as an adult learner, and where those systematic ableist deficiencies lie, and whether or not they're willing to have that discussion is going to be dependent on where they are within their disability, within the social, whether we're having a social discussion about disability, or whether we're, the language that's used, and all of the things that we've been learning in this class have a huge impact on the way in which people are allowed to or feel confident in sharing.